Hey, welcome back to J.P.'s World of Wrestling. I am your man, J.P. Today, we are talking about Bret the Hitman Hart. Why are we talking about Bret? Well, just because he's kind of been on my mind lately. Not for any other reason except I've been watching some old WWF content, and Bret Hart is in a lot of that content. So, a lot of people might remember Bret for Montreal, the 1997 Survivor Series incident. And that's unfortunate because I don't remember him for that at all. I remember him for everything that preceded that. His legacy in the WWF. And, you got to start with when him and Jim the Anvil came in as the Hart Foundation. They came in as a heel tag team, and managed by Jimmy Hart. And at WrestleMania 2, they were in a battle royal, and Bret was one of the last two guys in. He eliminated by Andre the Giant. And then they battled their way through the ranks, and right before WrestleMania 3, Hart Foundation able to win the tag titles from the British Bulldogs. And so then they, would continue to be pretty good champions, but then finally beaten by Strikeforce. And so then they tried to break up the Hart Foundation. They tried to push Bret Hart as a singles competitor. Didn't quite work the first time, so they put him back with Jim the Anvil. And the Hart Foundation won the tag titles again in the early 90s, and unfortunately lost them to the Nasty Boys. And so once again, Hart Foundation broke up, not because of any animosity between the two members, but just because WWF kind of wanted to push Bret Hart as a singles wrestler. They saw a lot of potential, and rightfully so. And so Bret Hart, wrestled his way through the ranks, and finally, at SummerSlam 1991, I believe it was, or it might have been 90, I think it was 91, where Bret Hart defeated Mr. Perfect to win the Intercontinental title. And Bret Hart was a great Intercontinental champion. I remember him quite well as Intercontinental champion, and at a house show, he lost the Intercontinental title to the Mountie, because he wasn't feeling good. And then at the Royal Rumble, I think it was 1990 when he won the Intercontinental title, because at the Royal Rumble 1991, no, I'm wrong, sorry. It was 1991, because at the 1992 Royal Rumble, Roddy Piper won the Intercontinental title from the Mountie. And so then at WrestleMania 8 in 1992, Bret Hart won the Intercontinental title back from Roddy Piper, even though he had lost it to the Mountie. But in order to get it back, he now had to go through Roddy Piper. Both of them were friends, both of them were baby faces, but Bret needed to go through Roddy Piper to regain the Intercontinental title, in which he did. So then, he wrestled his way all the way to the top again. Then finally, in 1993, Bret Hart defeated Ric Flair to win the WWF Heavyweight Championship. Hulk Hogan was kind of on his way out, so they needed a new champion. They needed a new face for the company. Bret Hart defeated Rick. Rick was on his way out, going back to WCW. But then at WrestleMania 9, of course, we all remember what happened. Bret Hart lost the title to Yokozuna. And then Hulk Hogan kind of swooped in, won it back from Yokozuna. And then Hulk lost to Yokozuna, blah, blah, blah. And then at WrestleMania 10, well, actually, we got to back up, because before that, Bret Hart had a little bit of a feud with Jerry the King Lawler, because Bret Hart won the King of the Ring in 1993. Jerry Lawler didn't appreciate that. He attacked Bret, thus starting a pretty bitter rivalry between the two. And finally, Bret Hart won that feud with a Kiss My Foot match. And with Jerry Lawler sort of behind him, Bret Hart could now set his sights once again on the WWF title. And at WrestleMania 10, actually, Bret Hart co-won the Royal Rumble with Lex Luger. And so, because they couldn't both wrestle Yokozuna at the same time, because they didn't do three-way matches back then, they had both Luger and Bret wrestle Yokozuna at WrestleMania 10. Luger didn't win the title. Bret did. So Bret won the title several more times in the WWF, losing it to, you know, Diesel and Undertaker and guys like that. He wrestled guys like that. But during that time, you know, Bret, you know, he had opponents like IRS and Razor Ramon and Hakushi and The Undertaker and guys, and, you know, those were formidable opponents. But it wasn't the same level of opponents that Hulk Hogan had. So, and also because the wrestling business was kind of struggling at the time, because the WWF was going through a steroid trial. Vince McMahon was going through the trial, not the WWF, but Vince McMahon was. So because of that, wrestling was slow. And so Bret really wasn't drawing the numbers that he could have. But nevertheless, he stayed in there. He stayed with it. And, you know, then Shawn Michaels was kind of coming along. So then him and Shawn kind of had this back and forth rivalry. And then, of course, we all remember what happened in 1997 at Survivor Series. But up until then, Bret Hart had a pretty impressive legacy. And I always remember him being one of my tippy-top favorite all-time Intercontinental champions. And back in the day, I used to love the way Bret Hart would deliver backbreakers. That was one of my favorite all-time wrestling moves, is the Bret Hart backbreaker. And, you know, before Sting came on, he's the only one that I ever saw do the sharpshooter. Actually, one time, Rugged Ronnie Garvin did the sharpshooter, but it was just called the Indian Deathlock, and he did it to Greg Valentine. But Bret Hart perfected the move, and Bret Hart was old school. He was old school to the bone, and he believed in making his moves look devastating, even though they were really protecting the opponent, and he wasn't hurting anybody, but he was making it look like he was. And so that's what I always respected about Bret. And these days, Bret has a lot of kind of controversial, strong, opinionated things to say, which, you know, that's his own opinion. He's entitled to his opinions. But I always liked Bret. I always respected him. And I hope that his legacy will go down as being one of the greatest wrestlers that ever lived. And I hope that Montreal doesn't really tarnish that at all. It was something that happened. It's unfortunate, but it happened. But I want to focus on all the positives. So that's what I'm doing. Bret Hart, I salute you, sir. Thank you. I'm talking like he's dead. He's not dead. He's very much alive and well, and he's still with us. He still makes appearances. But nevertheless, I know there's probably no chance in the world that he'll ever see this. But if he does, Bret Hart, thank you, sir. You are a credit to the wrestling business, and thank you for everything you gave to the wrestling business. Love it. And I didn't really talk about the devastating loss of Bret's brother Owen, but that's because that's for another video. But that's just one of those perils that Bret had to endure during his career. So, anyway, thank you, Bret Hart, and that is going to do it for this video. So if you're new, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.